Welcome to the second discussion on dialogue versus dissemination by John Durham Peters. Peters uses dialogue and dissemination to talk about two different models or ideas of communication. He draws his metaphors from Plato and from Jesus, who both tell stories that have the seed as the message, the farmer as the speaker, the soil as the audience, and the harvest as the outcome of communication, for example, understanding. Dialogue is a form of face-to-face communication that is one-on-one, controlled by the speaker, and produces perfect understanding. This is an ideal model of communication presented by Plato. In dialogue, the speaker has the power over the audience, the message, and ultimately the outcome of the communication. In the dialogue model, the speaker chooses the audience or selects the audience, selects the message, and makes sure that the right outcome is achieved. By contrast, with dissemination, we have a scattering of seeds, where messages are simply scattered about in all directions. In the model of dissemination, audience has much more power. The message is simply scattered and not controlled by the speaker. Not only does the speaker not control the audience or the message, but the outcome is also unknown. When the messages are scattered, there's no certainty of what will become of them. If we compare dialogue and dissemination, we have a face-to-face, one-on-one, speaker-controlled model where the outcome is soul-to-soul transparency or perfect understanding. And then we have dissemination, where messages are scattered across space and time, the audience has the control, and the outcome is ultimately uncertain. Peter states that we're used to favoring dialogue because we're suspicious of messages that are scattered. Think of these examples. Have you ever heard someone say something like, "Television destroys our family togetherness," or "People are always on their phones and it makes it so hard to relate," or "Online classes aren't really as good because they don't allow for true interaction"? Let's look at those examples again and see what kinds of values we can find there. In the example of television, it's togetherness. With cell phones, it's relation. And with online teaching, it's interaction. All of those things are different forms of connection. And this is why Peter says that what we ultimately crave is a meeting of the minds, a perfect communion, 100% shared understanding, connection with an untouchable other. Peters explains that our worries about scattered messages show us that ultimately what we fear is a loss or connection. But, he asks, do we ever really have that soul-to-soul connection that we so deeply crave? Is it even really possible? In fact, doesn't all communication, even face-to-face dialogue, where the speaker has selected the audience and the message, miss the mark or fail to some extent? Isn't there always some sort of gap or misunderstanding left, even in the most intimate communication? And so Peters asked, should we think of communication as perfect contact or as patience amid the imperfections? He says, nor are the gaps between sender and receiver always chasms to be bridged. Sometimes they are vistas to be appreciated or distances to be respected. Dissemination is our lot. So what do you think? Do you agree that dissemination is our lot? Should we always try to bridge the gaps that divide us? If perfect understanding is impossible and maybe even undesirable, how can we craft an ethics of communication that simply doesn't judge it against an impossible ideal? Now, you might be thinking, why does this even matter? This seems really abstract and theoretical for intercultural communication. Well, most intercultural communication scholarship does assume that a dialogue model is the ideal form of communication. Take these examples. We have to develop our ability to understand another person's feelings and experience them ourselves, or people differ in their approach to life, and we have to understand them to really understand those people. But is understanding someone, feeling their feelings, experiencing their experiences, really the goal of communication or intercultural communication? Is that the way that we should try to bridge gaps? I agree with Peters, and I don't think so. So we're reading this to ask, how can we think differently? how can we think about an ethics of dissemination where intercultural communication is not necessarily modeled on the assumption of perfect understanding and speaker control?